We're live.
Hi, my name is Gil Robertson, president of the African American Film Critics Association, the largest body of Black
Gil,
critics.
hold on just a second.
Yeah.
It's saying that it's setting up. All right, now we're live.
Hi, my name is Gil Robertson, president of the African American Film Critics Association, the largest body of Black film critics in the world. Tonight, we are having our first YouTube live chat with two lifelong friends of mine, A. Scott Galloway and Gail Mitchell. I reached out to them on Saturday when I discovered the news that we had lost both Andre Harrell, the former chief of Uptown Records, former president of Motown, and just, you know, an all-around terrific guy. And then on the heels of that, we discovered that Little Richard, the iconic creator of rock and roll, had also transitioned. And of course, the weekend wasn't done until we found three. And that's what we discovered when Miss Cleanup Woman, Betty Wright, also succumbed to cancer. And so tonight, what we're going to do briefly is we're going to commemorate the memory of these iconic creative musicians whose careers also spread it into TV and film, and in all areas of American life. So without further ado, we're going to start this thing up. And for those of you who are watching, please feel free to send us questions via YouTube Live. So, hey, you guys.
Hey.
I mean, when did you guys learn of, I guess Andre was the first to go. Where were you? What were you doing? How did you hear?
I first heard about it as a rumor. I was dead asleep. You know, I went to bed early that night and I got a text from our mutual good friend, Pat Shields, who was asking whether or not it was true. And I was like, hey, you know, and she sent that text to me about 11 o'clock at night, and I didn't wake up and see it until 3. So I went on to social media, and that's when I found out it was already all over social media. And it was very shocking. I mean, young, amazingly, you know, talented, seemed to have so much more to do, and yet he did so much while he was here. So that's how I first heard about it. And I was just, like I said, I was very surprised.
Yeah.
Gail, what about you?
I was a friend texted me. I wasn't on. D Nice was on, and this friend texted me and said that she had been listening to his tuned into his IG channel, and he had stopped abruptly announcing the news that Andre had passed away. So she texted me. So I think it's like what Scott said, as I remember, around 11:30, 12 o'clock, because I'd been up doing some writing for work and stuff. So then I was scrambling, and then I think we got something up about 1:30 that morning. And then, yeah, it was just, as Scott said, very shocking. You just go, wow. And it just kind of a gut punch and a life punch. You know, everyone, you know, has to go through this at some point, but you're never really ready, you know, so very surprising.
We've been dealing with so many people passing of late that it, you know, you don't want to say that you get numb to it, but, you know, before it was, you know, it's mostly older people into at a certain age range where it's sad, but not surprising. But with Andre, it was like, you know, wow, you know, that's young. And then of course, top of mind is, you know, was it COVID related? You know,
Right.
and we found out, thankfully, don't think that it was heart related, but COVID seems to affect so many different systems in our bodies. You know, it's like your lungs, your heart, you know, all kind of different things. So who knows? But like I said, it was very, very, very surprising and very sad.
Yeah.
You know, and all three of us worked with, I don't believe I ever did anything with Betty Wright though, but maybe. But let's start with Andre, since he was the first. Let's start with Little Richard, since he was the oldest, and his death was probably the only one that wasn't as surprising as the other two. I mean, Scott, I know that you've written about you know, the history of R&B music for a number of different publications. Where would you place Little Richard in terms of his contributions to culture?
He was a icon, an originator of rock and roll music, and right in there with rhythm and blues. He was a songwriter, he was a performer, he was a pianist, he was a band leader. You know, he was in motion pictures, and he had such an indelible personality. I mean, I think even beyond, when he passed, it hit me a lot like when Chuck Berry passed a couple of years ago. And when Chuck Berry passed, I was in my car and on a rare occasion was listening to the radio, you know, and the blues guy on the jazz station here cut into his show and talked about and dropped it on me, that Chuck Berry has passed on, and my heart stopped, because Chuck, along with Little Richard and Elvis, for a lot of people, they were the tripods of rock and roll. And so I felt like, wow, we have lost, the actual foundation of that music that has spread out and influenced so many things. And again, Little Richard, an icon musically, and also his image. You can't look at David Bowie or Prince or any number of different artists, particularly ones that were of an androgynous kind of a feel, and not see Little Richard. Um, uh, Very, very bold artist, conflicted in his sexuality, and throughout his life, he was going back and forth with his wanting to be that rebellious rock guy and not caring if people thought that he was gay or not, to being very almost what's the word I'm looking for? Almost, really putting it on the back burner. He turned to Christ, turned to the Bible, and really was renouncing. I think that's the word I was looking for. That aspect of himself, and it was something that tore at him, throughout his life, back and forth, back and forth. But it never seemed to have a completely detrimental effect on what his legacy is, because rock and roll is rebellious music, it's party music, it's wild, it's raunchy, and it's fun. And that was Little Richard, and we saw that, throughout his life. He was a character that, a man that we saw just really embody the spirit of rock and roll, and I had a chance to meet him once. It was very interesting. He was kind of low key. It was a morning visit to the magazine I used to work for, Urban Network. And I forgot what he was promoting. I still can't remember what it was, but he was in more of that reserve mode, all white suit, impeccable makeup, hair. And he was kind of reserved, but still had some of that, some of that fiery personality that would spark out, every once in a while. He knew he was Little Richard, and he could pull that character Little Richard, out of a hat whenever he wanted to. But I found him to be just, a very kind man, very warm and generous hearted. And when I heard that he passed, I was sad, but a little relieved, because I will share that I was doing some work last year with the great R&B artist Charles Wright, who was a very good friend of Little Richard. And I was talking to him one day, and I said, man, Little Richard, I mean, you guys came up, blah, blah. He said, yeah, I can get him on the phone right now. I said, no. He said, yeah, I'm gonna call him right now. He called Little Richard, and I got to hear them. I didn't speak. He didn't even say anything about me being there. I just got to hear them have a buddy conversation. But in that, I also heard very distinctly in Little Richard's voice that he was tired and he was in pain. And he actually cut the conversation kind of short. He was very happy to hear from Charles, but he was like, man, I'm not having the best day, Charles. Man, it's not a good day for me, man.
Wow.
I'm in pain. I'm in pain. I'm hurting, Charles. But it's great to hear from him. I'll talk to you. But I can't stay on the phone long. Can't stay on the phone too long today, Charles. So I'm the kind of person that, when I look at our legends, I feel like they have contributed so much and given so much. And so you know, when I heard that he was gone, I was a little sad, but also relieved that this man was on his next journey, which I'm sure is going to be as fabulous as this one or more.
Well, I knew who he was and admired him. They did mention it in his obit. I don't know how many people know. I'm probably going down a rabbit hole here for a lot of people, but there's a movie with Nick Nolte and Bette Midler and Richard Dreyfuss called Down and Out in Beverly Hills. And Little Richard was in there in that, and he was a flamboyant artist. He's playing himself in the movie, but he was a Beverly Hills neighbor of Bette Midler and Richard Dreyfuss. It's a great movie, and I'm trying to find it now because I want to see it, because what Scott's talking about, I wish going back that I'd had the chance to really sit down with a Chuck Berry after seeing Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll. And then recently at the Grammy Museum, they had Chuck Berry's son, Verdine White, Taylor Hackford, who did Ray and Officer and a Gentleman and did Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll, and Ron Weisner, and they produced a documentary short film, well, I should say an hour's film about Chuck Berry called Brown Eyed Handsome Man. So they had all original performances of artists like Paul McCartney, I'm trying to remember, Keith Richards, Mick Jagger, people who had covered his songs, him on stage performing with Linda Ronstadt. And I was sitting there in the Grammy Museum going, damn it, I wish I'd have had the chance to meet him. I did meet Little Richard. I was working at Radio and Records at the time, and periodically artists would come through there. And Little Richard was one, and this was probably in the late 80s, early 90s, and we were just everybody was fangirling and fanboying, and he was fabulous with the eye makeup and the makeup on it and the hair, but very, as Scott just said, very down to earth, you know, and certain people project an aura. And he's a person that when I stood by him, it's just, you go like, wow. And then I was able to see some clips. I think it was Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry, and Little Richard. There were some outtakes that I was sent with them discussing, sitting down at a piano in a small room, and they were all discussing what it was like coming up in the 40s and 50s and plying their trades, and just, you know, the rough road that they paved for a lot of people today. And I love that kind of stuff. It's just fascinating. So it is a major loss, and I'm glad people are recognizing exactly what kind of a indelible imprint he left in music, especially rock and roll, because a lot of times we don't get that credit on the Black side. I don't think that we do more than just R&B, and we do more than just jazz. We're in the mix, and we've been, you know, leading the charge in a lot of genres.
I think for Little Richard, he was also, you know, he seemed to be very defensive about that. And he always, as we know, he would be at the Academy Awards introducing, or the Grammys, introducing somebody else's award, and then get up there and tell you, I'm the originator of all this, and, you know, y'all should be giving me an award. You know, it was great, you know. But I mean, I really, you know, when he first came out, you know, and he was making the serious hardcore rock and roll that was making the kids' gigs flip. I mean, they're just going crazy off of this beat, this sound, this energy, you know. And they did that thing where they tried to have, you know, the white artists come and re-record the songs and try to take that from us. And in that period, it didn't work. I mean, it worked in the BS sense of the chart positions and all that kind of thing, where they could manipulate and, you know, oh, Pat Boone. But in reality, even the white kids, they wanted the Little Richard version. I mean, it was almost like something that they wanted to go slumming, to go and deal with and feel and see, because they could feel that energy was coming from over here, not over there. And yeah, it's Black people, but oh my God, we can't, this energy is so infectious that we have to deal with it. I mean, today you look at a magazine like Rolling Stone, I mean, everybody gave it up big time for Little Richard. I mean, they had like 10 articles in Rolling Stone about Little Richard. You know, they had the regular obituary, they had an appreciation, they had the 20 songs you need to know. And then here's all these other people telling you why they love Little Richard. And I mean, you know, from all of the stuff that he did, you know, demanding that he be remembered and respected, I think he got it. I mean, he certainly got it. You know, people love and respect that man for all that he went through and all that he gave us in the art form.
Yeah, we did that too at Billboard. I got sent a comment from Pat Boone, of all people, extending his condolences. And then today I saw that we posted an As Told To from Pat Boone about what the friendship that he and Little Richard had, talking about music and whatever. So I mean, talk about connecting bridges and taking it forward. I just thought that was tremendous too.
No,
And even
Richard owned his kept his publishing, right?
no, the story is that he lost it, and then Michael Jackson acquired the ATV publishing, which included Little Richard's publishing, and he gave it back to him. And I think that is what enabled Little Richard to live. I mean, for years he lived in the penthouse of the Sunset Hyatt hotel. I mean, he had, he just lived there, and everybody knew that he was there, and they would come and visit. And he was all over the Sunset Strip as an older man still, hanging out, and popping up and causing scenes and stuff. But I think that he went to, if I'm not mistaken, Atlanta in his last years, and that's where he was being cared for. If you see later pictures of him, he had really adopted a much more conservative appearance, and he was really into that Bible, and he was, just really, getting himself ready to meet his maker, and renouncing a lot of his rock and roll history. But he, did want to, it's that strange dichotomy, like he couldn't let it completely go. He wanted that respect and that recognition for everything that he'd accomplished, but on the personal front, he just really wanted to be known as a man of God, and that he was doing the best that he could to speak God's word. I mean, there's even appeared, somebody told me a story just this week of him, so many people I spoke to this week about Little Richard, about him being in a limousine on Hollywood Boulevard, and rolling the non-see-through glass down, and giving Bibles to people, his own personal kind of inscribed Bibles to folks. I mean, he was really serious about his Christianity toward the end. And the other thing I was going to say, just as a more of a pop culture thing, I love one of my favorite scenes in that James Brown movie, which was really, not one of my favorite movies, but there were some really good performances in it. And the scene where Little Richard is at the, he was flipping hamburgers at a place, and James Brown comes and visits him to get some advice about, the music business and everything. That is one of the most haunting and compelling scenes. And I talked to yet another friend of mine. This is Robin Russell, who's the former drummer of New Birth, who played with Little Richard and remained his friend to the very end. He played with Richard like in '72, but I mean, he probably talked to Little Richard as up to last week. That's the kind of friend he was. And I said, man, ask Little Richard if that actually happened. And he asked him for me. He said, no, that scene, that as it transpired in the movie, never happened. But of course, he and James Brown were friends, and Little Richard did give James Brown some very salient advice about the music industry. And so again, a very giving guy, helpful, and about his people as well.
Wow. His sound was so distinctive. Ed, our voice of God, just asked me to ask you to talk about his sound, and to talk about the influence of his very unique sound.
Man, his piano playing, which was like a combination of barrel house and boogie woogie and all that, was it was infectious. And when you added it to these crazy lyrics, Tutti Frutti and Long Tall Sally and all these characters, and just that energy of rock and roll to get people up out of themselves, to party, to let their hair down or take their hair off, and just do. I swear to God, when after I wrote my Facebook appreciation for Little Richard, I just started playing a lot of that music. And I'm a pretty reserved guy, but I'm sitting there, and I mean, my foot is just going, and I want to get up, and you're just, that Little Richard sound was gospel, boogie woogie, a little jazz, and even though it wasn't invented yet, it was, again, part of what would become, soul and R&B and funk. It was all in there, and it was all about the way it hit your heart and made you feel. And like I said, it touched people around the world. the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, both, drew heavily from what Little Richard did, as did so many other artists here. Um, it was just he truly was the architect, or at least one of the architects of rock and roll, which is the foundation of all of pop music today. I mean, you just have to give it up to him like that. That's what he was.
Yeah, I think,
Wow.
yeah. It's all that Scott said. But I think part of that too, Scott, is the whole you still have that church gospel foundation up in there. And you start thinking, I grew up AME, so mainly it was the Pentecostals. Yeah, I would love to go to the revivals and things growing up and whatever, because they get that stuff going, and it just enters your system, and it kind of takes you away, and you start dancing, and what they would do, the laying of the hands and all that. It just, Charlie Wilson does a little bit of that at his current shows. It's just that root that a lot of the artists from back in the day had, Aretha, the whole bit. So yeah,
Yeah.
and I can see now when you say that about James and Little Richard about the performing, because I think that's what's missing in a lot of stage shows today. It's very orchestrated, and let's do the choreography and whatever. And all these guys did was just get out there and just go.
Yeah.
And
And
I
just do what they do.
do it exactly, and could stay on stage. They weren't winded. It's just it's yeah.
They were great musicians. I mean, again, he had a great band, Little Richard and Upsetters. I mean, when Little Richard, after about 4 or 5 years of being the architect of rock and roll, and he pulled back and did some serious religious studies. People were grabbing members of his band like crazy, because they knew that there was a magical band that Little Richard put together. James Brown got a couple of cats, and there's some other musicians that they got some of Little Richard's musicians, because not only was he a great musician himself, but he put together the band of all bands, that could perform and play that music and make the audiences go crazy. So that has to be definitely stated too, man. I mean, he was, he showed you what a rock and roll performance was supposed to look and feel like.
So now let's talk about Andre. I mean, Andre certainly, literally, could be called the child of Little Richard. How, in what ways was he the beneficiary of the doors that Little Richard knocked down?
Well, I mean, when I think about Andre, I think of someone who started, at the very bottom. He was a songwriter and a hip hop artist,
Mhm.
and then he became one of the architects for Uptown Records, and was great at finding talent, and not. I think one of the greatest gifts that Andre had was that he didn't do a whole lot of molding of talent. He found talent that he believed in, and in its raw state, and just provided the means and the outlet for that talent to come out and explode, because we're always looking for that new thing, that thing that's different, that thing that can affect people all over, entertain everybody, or just be a blast, specifically in Black music to begin with, but then bloom and become pop in its own way. And when you look at Mary J. Blige, Jodeci, Heavy D and the Boys, and so many of the other acts that came through Uptown, um, I think that is the legacy. I mean, to your point, Gil, about Little Richard, or Andre being a son of, or whatever, however you phrased it, of Little Richard. I think it was in the sense of presenting something, pretty much raw, and having it, and having that reality, that realness of it, be the thing that takes the world by storm. It didn't need to be polished, the way Clive Davis, did with a Whitney Houston, and make, kind of mold her into something that could be palatable to everybody. Andre found artists that were dope, and let them come out pretty much as they were, and that was recognized by their peers and by the people they came up with and by people that could really relate to that. Mary J. Blige became an artist that young girls, young Black girls in particular, could, they said that I know her. That she's me, and they, and they could relate to that. And Andre let her come out like that, and that was awesome. And Jodeci the same way. Who are these guys? These church boys with their raw and crazy. Showing more of their street sense. He let that come out. This is in the era when you had Boys to Men, I believe, was already out. You had more of these choreographed, polished vocal groups that were coming out of a doo-wop and Temptations thing or whatever, and Andre and them, they decided to go with Jodeci, which was 180 degrees different. They were street, they were very talented, but they were raw. And so I think that, to your point, Gail, that was the way that I would say Andre mirrored, or the torch was passed down to him from somebody like Little Richard, who gave us raw essence, rock and roll, that scared the bejesus out of a lot of people that were older, but the kids went crazy for it. They connected to that energy.
Well, I agree with that, but there's also, Gil, I think too, and Scott, the next iteration of Berry Gordy, because Andre had astute ears. I was reading an appreciation that someone wrote for Billboard Online about Andre, a riff off of Questlove's very poignant tribute to Andre, saying, we didn't give him his flowers while he was still here. And there's so many instances of that. And I don't, that people didn't realize. They knew Diddy, they knew Mary J, but a lot of people didn't know the backstory behind that, and how, Notorious doing the remix with Mary on Real Love and sampling, here's the 6 Degrees, and sampling a Betty Wright song. But again, with Andre in that space, Heavy D, I guess there's a story in the appreciation where I guess he was consulting or working or doing something with, I think it was Def Jam, and kept pushing Heavy D, and the powers that be at the time there were saying, well, I don't know, he's fat, he's overweight, no one's gonna, the girls, and he, I still love the heavyweight lover ever, and he was great, and despite his size, he was smooth, he was dope. The women, he could get any woman he wanted. Nicest man in real life. Oh my God, I got the chance to meet him. But Andre just had an ear, and that takes talent too, where you hear something and you don't, as you said, Scott, you don't polish it too much. You don't put too much of yourself on that act. You just let him or her or the group do whatever. I think that's what happened with Guy, because you had Guy with New Jack Swing and all that kind of stuff, and then hip hop soul with Mary J on down with and Jodeci and that, and then he just captured also. It was a whole different time for Black people then, I think, and he helped bring in the whole elegance thing. And I remember going to events that Andre would host, and he would like to have as I recall, going to one event down by the Wiltern, he wanted everybody to be dressed up, no jeans, no anything, because he was always impeccable in the suit and the tie, and just that whole Black excellence thing we celebrate now with Diddy and Jay-Z and all that. Andre was doing that back when he was doing Uptown, and then later heading up Motown. And then, as somebody said too, the whole party thing. Because there's different layers to us. And Andre showed a lot of that too, that you didn't have to dress a certain way to be a Black person or be perceived as Black, as long as you were comfortable in yourself, whether it was in a suit or jeans or whatever. There's different layers, and that's what we're going to tackle here at this label.
And then even beyond the music, I mean, he had such vision, and he immediately, pretty swiftly, parlayed the success of Uptown as a music company and with all of that into the area that Gil is our expert in, which is, television and film. I mean, New York Undercover was about as revolutionary a show as we had in that era. It was so welcome. And, this was also it was like you said, Gil, it was an interesting time that we lived through of Black culture, because, this is Arsenio Hall show was going on at that time. And we had a strong Black platform to, really show our artists, as they were. And so it's, you have New York Undercover TV show. And then started off with Strictly Business, not one of my favorite films, but, Halle Berry was in that. I think that was one of her introductions to the world. And then to your point of him not getting his flowers, it was really interesting that Babyface postponed his Waiting to Exhale tribute on Mother's Day because he was so, taken aback by, he just said he couldn't do it. His head was not, he couldn't do it. And, Ellie and Babyface with LaFace Records and Jam and Lewis with Perspective, and they all tried to do things in movies, some more successful than others. I think the only reason that Andre might not have gotten the flowers that we were discussing is because he really gave up the artist thing along, early on to be an executive, to champion other people. Whereas LA and Face, they had an image and they had, they were songwriters and they had been in groups and that were very successful. Same for Jam and Lewis, and so Andre was known and loved and respected by the business, but a lot of people on the street, they don't really know his name. And I think that's the only area that he didn't get his flowers, because I think the industry showed him much love and he showed it much love, which is why he got that love.
Yeah, and it's a good thing. I saw BET send a statement, which we ran, but also BET, he had been working with BET on an Uptown miniseries putting together, and they have said they're moving forward with that. So I'm really intrigued and excited, anxious to see that and that'll tell, a lot of the backstory. So
especially after Power and Empire, it'll be good to see, something really based on, a specific historical story that we can grasp onto. That'll be great.
Exactly.
Talk about the real empire.
Yes. That's what I'm talking about. And that's when I'll watch, because I didn't really follow those other shows for very long. I just, having worked in the industry, it was kind of like, sorry, anybody out there.
So Gil, did you have a favorite Uptown song?
Oh God, there were so many. So many. His the music that came out of Uptown was literally the soundtrack of our generation, or one of the soundtracks. We're being joined by Ronda Racha, as Ed likes to correct.
Ronda Racha Penrice.
What's up, girl?
Hey, look a hot mess. I was just listening.
Who wants to add additional comment on Andre's legacy and what he brought to our culture?
Yeah, he definitely brought the flash and the I relate him to Little Richard, because when I think of Little Richard, I think of how over the top and flashy and his showmanship, and Andre Harrell definitely brought that to the game. He, being a person from New York, even when they took Jodeci, Jodeci, even though, Puffy gets all of the credit, but it's Andre who set that atmosphere. Andre, from being a performer, knew that you had to come and give the audience what they wanted. Now, when we get to people kind of breaking from what we're used to in R&B and then coming to hip hop, at that time, it was a big schism. And so a lot of times people don't recognize that what they were giving us was showmanship too. Because even with Mary J. Blige, she wasn't just seen as raw, like she was out there rocking some of the latest stuff. Like people wanted to look like Mary J. Blige. It wasn't just that, we were feeling her, but you wanted to rock what you saw Mary having. So like Andre created the whole idea of ghetto fabulousness, and that you could, look at hip hop style now, or when you think about it, you think about how people were mixing the Versace with the kicks and, all of that. It's created a whole movement. And Andre was able to take that and to give us the elements of what we were used to in the R&B and soul sound, and still make that relevant to the streets. Like merging that with hip hop was really huge.
No doubt. No doubt.
Exactly. Plus, you got to throw Robin Thicke in there. He's the one that Robin Thicke to the forefront. That was one of his too. So I mean, just authenticity is a word that comes to mind for me with Andre. He was, yeah, it was just very authentic and from the heart. You know, it was. I made a note to myself earlier. He's a music man because we got very few music men anymore. It's become, you know, to me a lot of numbers and whatever. And for me, to me, music is a lot of gut, and you know, you hear things and you know right away. And I think Andre, I don't think, I know he had that part.
Yeah,
You know,
he
and
definitely
those are rare.
recognized.
Yeah, those are rare.
And from what I'm hearing, like a lot of people in my network, you know, personally knew him. I didn't personally know him, just been around him and interviewed him.
Right.
But for a lot of them, he was the one who gave them their first shot. He was the one who let them know that having their ear to the street, that it could be something bigger. And like when Gail, when you guys were pointing out earlier about doing like New York Undercover or even trying to make films, I mean, that wasn't a part of the hip hop urban culture DNA at the time.
Exactly.
And when I saw a very nice tweet from Ice-T talking about that he wouldn't be where he was without Andre Harrell, because he was the one who connected him to Dick Wolf.
Oh wow.
Nice.
So, and then you hear all those kinds of stories, like people have been breaking them down of how Andre was the person, whenever he could support you, he did. And he was a person who always put you in a situation to make you better. I know that I haven't gone through all of it, but Keith Clinkscales wrote a piece about how Andre made him a better executive and knowing him.
I wouldn't be surprised at that at all. Yeah, I mean, he kind of created a new template, like beyond the Berry Gordy situation from the past. You know, he took that to another level, and it definitely influenced a lot of other multimedia Black executives that came after him. You know, because you know, he took those bold steps from, you know, a record label to a movie and television series. You know, that was not common at all for us. You know, we were starving in those periods for our images and our stories and our, you know, life being put out there in a more authentic way, as opposed to the Hollywood kind of presentations of us. He definitely helped in getting some real images of us out there in all the different media platforms.
And, you know, he was building on a template that, you know, I mean, Russell Simmons, like, you know, when I was younger and, you know, you saw the Wild Styles and the Beat Streets and I mean, those things were exciting. And so I just think that, you know, there's this foundation that's been laid and each generation is just pushing it further and further.
Exactly.
No doubt.
And then, of course, we had the cleanup woman, the original cleanup.
Oh, Betty Wright, yeah.
Betty Wright, to round out the number 3 for those of us who believe in that thing. Gail, talk about her legacy.
Well, Betty, wow, you talk about mapping a blueprint. We were just talking about Andre kicking the door open to the next generation to take, you know, film, TV, take music over onto that side. Betty, I mean, with her label, Miss B Records, you know, kind of mapping out a blueprint for female ownership and taking control. I was reading about her earlier over the weekend, and I got the chance to meet her. I think it was 2003, and Billboard used to do R&B hip hop conferences. We did it in Miami. We started a R&B and a hip hop Hall of Fame, and she was our first R&B honoree. And the most lovely woman, very down to earth, very nurturing, very caring. And she talked about starting at, I guess she started singing at 11, her first record at 13. And she just went on from there. I think she said that she had 5 kids. She had 5 grandchildren at the time. This is 2003. But she was talking about, you know, it got to the point where she put things out there. She wasn't getting her money. So, well, forget that. I'll just do it myself. And I guess she shopped one record around. I can't remember which record it was. All the labels, no, we're not going to put it out. We don't want it. That's when she started with Miss B. And then when the record started taking off, here all these labels come back and say, you know, we want that record. And she
This was
just,
No Pain, No Gain, right?
yeah,
Is that No Pain,
yeah,
No Gain?
and
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. And she said, you know what? I did all the baking. Y'all didn't help me, so I'm gonna eat the cake by myself. I don't need you, basically, you know. So that's what I liked about her. She was just, the last time I saw her, I think was 2017 at a Revolt conference. And Andre Harrell was getting ready to interview Kevin Liles. It was the luncheon keynote, and there she was at a table with some of her family, and I got a chance to catch up with her for a few minutes. But she was very behind the scenes. She was very much involved. She and I both worked together on committees at the Recording Academy, and she was forever promoting the genre, promoting ownership, promoting, you know, you guys need to get it right in terms of the categories and this and that. She was just very behind the scenes, very nurturing.
Yeah, and she was a hustler. I mean, you know, in the most positive sense of the word. And I think that's probably why a lot of the rappers and hip hop artists related to her, because of how hard she hustled to do things and how she used all of her talents. You know, she didn't allow herself to be pigeonholed. You know, she started off as a singer artist, but she also wrote songs. And she said, well, I can sing, I can teach other people to sing. So she's a vocal coach. And, you know, I'm seeing all these talented kids out here, talent scout, you know, record label. And she could perform and she could do it all. She didn't really allow anything to limit her. And then as she got older, she became this just mega mentor to all sorts of people. I was reading these stories that, you know, I think, you know, she really opened herself up, maybe a little too much. And I only say that because Mary's saying she's getting phone calls at 3 a.m. from hip hop artists talking about, Betty, you got to help me. I need a hook. I need somebody to come in and sing this. And she wasn't, you know, it seems that she didn't really put the kind of boundaries for her personal space and personal life that she needed to, because these people, you know, were just coming at her. And it was all love, but it was like she had her own family. She'd had, you know, people in her life that she took care of. But it seems like she also was one of those women that was adopted by so many others that just kind of really leaned on her. And I'm sure it was very positive in a lot of ways, but I'm wondering if some of that, you know, took a toll on her, because it just seemed like she was very busy and kind of, you know, being pulled at in from a lot of different directions. And because she was such a giving, loving spirit, she didn't really know how to say no. And I'm just so happy that her story got to be told on Unsung before like just before she passed on. That got out there, and I was really happy when I saw that pop up on the schedule that her and Al Jarreau and Billy Paul, you know, were being covered in that season, along with Goody Mob and, you know, some more contemporary type artists, because it really was a bridge between what's called old school and what's happening now. I mean, she was as current when she passed as she was at what some people would consider to be her creative peak.
I
So
mean,
much,
yeah,
much respect to Miss B.
exactly. Little Wayne were among the, I think, Slick Rick, I think, I'm not sure, I'm spacing now. And
DJ Khaled.
DJ, yeah, DJ Khaled, Joss Stone. I mean, you're right, she was a great bridge. And to me, that's what music's all about. Just because you reach a certain seasoned plateau doesn't mean all of a sudden it stops. So it's nice to see reaching back and people acknowledging the generations that came before and have, you know, the proverbial paved the way kind of thing. We just can't forget that, you know, we just.
And I must give props to her, because last year, one of my favorite albums of the year was the OJ's album,
Yeah.
The Last Word. And Betty was very involved in that album, and particularly the lead single. It's supposed to be the OJ's final album, and they've been friends, as you can imagine, since way back, you know, back in the at least the early 70s, if not late 60s. And she helped them with this song called Above the Law, which was seriously slamming our sitting president and the administration and all the stuff that was really bad last year, that it's just taken a whole nother turn this year. And she wrote, you know, helped write that song that was so incendiary and blatant. And there weren't any young artists, you know, writing what's going on or any like really hardcore, at least in the R&B world, those kinds of songs. I mean, it was directly pointed, you know, right at the White House. And for Betty to be involved in that, and it was such a great song, and a great performance from Walter and Eddie of the OJs, you know. And so this is a conscious sister, and oh my goodness, you know, that's where, you know, I mean, she was working with the OJs at the same time she's working with DJ Khaled. That's what that
Right.
really tells you that's the bridge.
Yeah,
And
I'm sorry. Yeah, the last line, I'm sorry, in the interview I did with her in 2003 said, I don't know when, basically I'm paraphrasing this part. She says, I don't know about sitting down. I don't know what that is. So in what you said earlier about her all hours of the day and night, but the last line was, I'll still be singing in heaven. And that's how I ended the interview. And I know she is probably doing that right now, you know.
right now.
Right now.
Yeah, she even
Guys,
said in
thank
one
you,
song.
our music family, our family of journalists. I thank you for
Rhonda had a
the
point though.
time.
Rhonda has a point.
Yeah,
No, I just said even she said in Unsung, she said
Uh-huh.
that she didn't consider this work. So
Right.
so as long, and then her, like I found out about her passing because her niece had posted it. And then, and so her niece sang back up, and then she had
Wow.
daughters that were singing back up. So this was truly what she loved to do. And I also have to make a point that I think that she'll always be relevant to younger people, because Tonight Is the Night, I don't know any young woman who can hear Tonight Is the Night and not relate to that, you know?
No doubt.
So it's just timeless.
A lot of dudes that can relate to that song. You know, everybody a little nervous on that first time, and you know, I know you're not gonna sing that. Oh my God, that whole intro that she did, that was a huge record. You know, her whole spoken rap leading up to it. I saw a great photograph today earlier of Betty and Millie Jackson together, and I
Wow.
forgot who the person was in between. I said, oh, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall that day in that room for those two sisters to be talking. But yeah, Eddie's song probably more so than a lot of Millie's, because Millie's were just X-rated. But Eddie told a poignant story that most certainly women could relate to, but I think even a lot of men can relate to how nervous it can be, you know, how nervous you can be in your first sexual experience. You know, that's that's a timeless song that people will relate to forever.
And it was a reggae hit too.
Yeah.
No,
Is that the
no,
original studio version was a reggae hit, right? Or did somebody remake it as a reggae hit?
I know that when I was younger, like in the 90s in New York, we I mean, my friends, I would have to tell them that's Betty Wright. Yeah, and like just break down some of the, I'm like, yes, that's Betty Wright, that's Clarence Carter, you know.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Well, no, thank you, everyone. I mean, Little Richard, Andre Harrell, and Betty Wright will certainly be long remembered, and for their contributions to our culture. And we certainly, on behalf of AAFCA, on behalf of the largest group of Black critics in the world, want to thank you for joining us tonight to break down who they were and what they meant to all of us.
Yeah, thank you
for
for
those
having
of you,
me.
absolutely. So thank you, Gail. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Rhonda. And for those of you who are watching, we're going to have more of these. So definitely subscribe to the AAFCA channel. And, you know, you guys have a great night. And thank you so much. I love you.
Love you
All
too.
right.
Thanks.
Much love.